Hello everybody and welcome to Tech Talk. And it is finally the final race of the 2025 Formula One season. Not just that, it's the final race of the current set of technical regulations. Everything changes next season for the brand new 2026 rules, the biggest change in the history of the sport. But it's also the final race for a name that's been in Formula One for a very, very long time, first appearing all the way back in 1993. I am, of course, talking about Sauber. The Sauber Formula One team will be replaced in 2026 by the brand new Audi Works team. But for Sauber, it is an emotional end to a very long period that's seen some great changes for the team. But before we get into that, I think it's just worth talking about how this year's car has improved all the way through this season. The team has finished on the podium and has had some great results, and that's a little bit surprising because at the start of this year, nobody really expected too much from Sauber at all. Because of that change to Audi for next season, it was almost beneficial for them to not do well this year and put all of their effort into the new team and the new car. But that's not exactly what happened. But before we get into that, I think it's worth just taking a look to see where Sauber have actually come from. They first arrived in Formula One all the way back in 1993 as a sort of Mercedes Works team. That's right, Sauber were the original Mercedes Formula One team, if you discount the Mercedes Formula One team from the 1950s. Sauber had been running the Mercedes Works racing team in sports cars for some years, but Mercedes decided not to race sports cars anymore, and there was a bit of political movement behind the scenes with Norbert Haug and others within the Mercedes administration to enter Formula One. However, it wasn't a proper works-backed effort at the very first gasp. In fact, it was so unofficial. The engine covers didn't say powered by Mercedes-Benz, they actually said concept by Mercedes-Benz. But Sauber's been a slightly unusual team throughout its existence. It's gone under a number of different identities. However, it's always been Sauber up until the end of this year, when that all comes sadly slightly to an end. After being a Mercedes Works team, the Mercedes engines went elsewhere to McLaren, where great success was found, and Sauber was left to use Ford engines, and they had those interesting Red Bull Ford liveries. Something familiar about that, can't think what it is. Then after that, Sauber then morphed into the BMW Works team. So the team that started off in sport as Mercedes then became BMW, and it was the BMW Sauber F1 team for a number of years until BMW unexpectedly quit at the end of the 2009 season. Sauber though continued and switched over to using Ferrari powertrains, and Ferrari have been Sauber's most consistent partner all the way through its existence, even though it's never been a Ferrari Works team. It did, though, for some slight historical fun, become the Alfa Romeo Works team in recent years, until Alfa Romeo pulled out of the sport. All of that period, though, they were using Ferrari engines and Ferrari gearboxes, though that was about to change. The Ferrari engines, of course, and power units, as we must now call them, carried on all the way up to the end of the 2025 season. However, in 2025, the Sauber car, which is an absolutely beautiful piece of engineering, was powered by Ferrari, but in preparation of the transition to becoming Audi, Sauber designed and built its own transmissions at the rear of the car. And they started that last season, and it wasn't an entirely smooth process, but it did develop forward. In fact, this year's Sauber has become quite an interesting topic of discussion because it's quite different to last year's Sauber, and it's a bit brave to make such a big change for a regulation set that's just about to come to an end. So to look back over this rulebook and this rules period, and particularly this year's car, here is one of the key people in the creation of the 2025 Sauber, Inaki Rueda. And I think we'll be hearing quite a lot from him.
So we come from not having a very successful car last year, and we started the year with the same philosophy that we had at the end of last year. So we had to go back to the drawing board because we realized on race one this year that we didn't have a very competitive platform. And we went back to the drawing board and we brought a whole new car for Barcelona. And since then we have had a much more competitive race car, with which our drivers have been able to race. And so yes, I think, and I'm confident in saying that right now we have a car that is far more competitive than it was last year, so we're happy with it, yes.
Right, well, looking back at this generation of car, the 22 to 25 car, do you have a favourite area of technical development?
Yes, it's not very visible, but it's the floor actually, because if you cast your mind back to the previous regulations, we struggled to have cars that raced each other. So it was very difficult to follow. And what the FIA tried to do with this regulation, and actually I think they've done successfully, is to make cars that are less subject to following another car. What does this mean? This is translated to very close racing. I hope it's something we retain with next year's regulations, but at least that is my favorite part. The fact that we have cars that race very close to each other without losing too much downforce, and that's down to the floor, as I said.
From the start of the season, Sauber, using their own very highly regarded wind tunnel in Switzerland, put an awful lot of work into the underside of the car, optimising the airflow and those ground effect floors. But for Iñaki Rueda, that process started really quite early, and to hear about that development, well, let's hear from him down in the pit lane.
Generally, well, of course, we have evolution of the car, new regulations for this season. We're evolving the floor a lot, you know. Under the floor, if you follow the profile of the gearbox, so the gearbox is right behind the engine, there's a bit on the floor that looks like a boat, and all teams call it a boat. And we basically put a patch of that boat to make it a different shape. So what that affects is the outflow of the flow through the floor and how it exits the car.
Well, with all of that talk about the floor, it's worth noting that sitting right in front of the leading edge of the floor is the wheels and suspension, but in front of that is the front wing. Now, Sauber didn't have the most complicated or most innovative or most different looking front wing of the cars of the 2025 season. However, that device was of particular importance when there was a clarification, I think we have to call it, of the technical regulations regarding how much those wings could flex underneath significant load. And pretty much every team in the pit lane had to adjust their front wing designs ever so subtly to make them work within those new requirements of the FIA. And to hear a little bit more about how Sauber managed that, Lee Stevenson, the team's chief mechanic, is down in the pit lane with Iñaki Rueda.
So you know there's a new TD in force, yes. It's mainly due to restrict front wing flexibility, okay? So actually, if you look at the front wing, it's going to be very difficult for you to spot what the changes are because they are visible, they're not visible, they're structural, okay? What do I mean by structural? I mean that the wing, as we load it up with speed, flexes less than the previous one, just so that we comply with the new TD.
In terms of the team as well, like what actually goes into changing that structural side of the front wing?
Okay, well, it's mostly done at home, of course, and it's just a structural engineering problem that we have to go through, and of course the guys at home, I'm sure, have done a great job to comply with the TD.
And is the new structure heavier than the old?
It actually is not heavier, no. We're talking maybe a few grams here and there, but it's not heavier at all.
The Spanish Grand Prix is normally somewhere where every team brings massive upgrade packages, but it wasn't really like that in 2025 because of, well, scheduling reasons. But Sauber did bring a significant upgrade to the rear end of the car, and that included a significant change to the floor of the car. And that was in response to the learnings that the team had got with this year's car in the first few races of the season. And we need to find out a little bit more about what was actually changed. So I'm not sure who we should speak to about that, but maybe Iñaki Rueda.
Yeah, so this is quite a big, that's the biggest change we have here, yeah? If you start looking at the front of the floor, it's completely different to one car to another car, and that philosophy follows all the way on the underfloor, which is something we cannot really see, yeah? What the main changes here is not so much to generate more pure downforce, but actually to generate a more drivable car, i.e., what do I mean by a more drivable car? So these cars, whenever they are in tow or whenever there's a gust of wind, they suffer momentary loss of downforce, okay? And so we are trying to get a car that is more drivable, and that's where the changes are aimed for. Yeah.
Development of the floor of the car continued on the Sauber for a surprisingly long amount of time, mainly because the team was coming up in the Constructors' Championship battle, and that means quite a lot of prize money for the team. But the floor itself is it's absolutely enormous component of the car, takes a number of people to carry it, and it's got lots of intricate details on. You don't want to drop it or scuff it because that would damage its performance. Yet development on it carried all the way through the season. And to explain a little bit more about some of the later development steps, well, guess who we're going to talk to? Yep, that's right. It's not Mattia Binotto, it's Iñaki Rueda.
So we started with a new concept for the car in Spain, in Barcelona. Yeah, we brought a new floor, and that actually proved quite good change. As a matter of fact, we scored points every single race since then. It's given a much more drivable platform for the drivers. We brought another step in the same direction on the floor. And for this race, we have another even step on that same direction. So it's basically, as I say, a new philosophy for the floor that has been developed further race by race. So what we call a new floor is just an evolution of that floor. That's for the floor. Then for the front wing, since Silverstone has a lower rear downforce than most other circuits, we're bringing a front wing that also provides lower downforce. It's just to match it so that they're balanced.
We've seen a few teams introducing new floors recently. Do you think there's a particular reason that that's been a sort of focus for a few teams?
It is, but I think it's a product of these regulations. The main part of the downforce in these cars comes from the floor. So you can understand that most teams are developing through that part of the car. You know, it is a crucial bit. We've been talking about cars being too low, using different skids. All the talk this year is about that floor being close to the ground and producing downforce.
While the team started out the 2025 season with a Germanic identity, it was a Swiss-German identity. For next year, it's going to get even more Germanic in that it's going to have a German identity. But balancing off the development of this year's car, particularly with really complex parts like new floors coming all of the time, against the development of next year's car when you only have a finite and limited amount of wind tunnel and CFD time, is something of a trade-off. And to manage that trade-off, you need to talk to people like Inaki Rueda. So we did.
It's quite tempting to say, oh, I found a new floor, let's just keep on developing this. But you need to weigh it against developing the 2026 car. So, as a matter of fact, we were not expecting to develop the car anymore until we found this big avenue. We're hoping that we believe this is the last evolution of the floor, but if in the next week or so the wind tunnel finds a bit more points, there might be another evolution this season. But I don't think much after that, because as you say, we're trading off time that should be spent on the 2026 car.
So even with an awful lot of attention on next year's car, the development on the Sauber included some really beautiful, intricate details, which I think were generally a bit overlooked because the team wasn't at the front of the field and it wasn't really at the back of the field, it was sort of in the middle. But the development on the car was really, really lovely. And there were some details that I think drew admiring glances from engineers up and down the pit lane. And you can see a couple of them behind me. This little element ahead of the rear view mirrors appeared on the car partway through the season, and I think it's absolutely lovely. Just take a look at it. That level of intricacy is not a simple thing to design. Takes CFD, takes some really sophisticated modelling in the wind tunnel at 60% scale to come up with something like that. It does make a difference, but all of those little differences all help improve the car's performance. Then look underneath the mirror, you can see these lovely little sculpted elements on the outer edge of the sidepod duct. Little details like this, again, all of those little gains. But when you're talking about little gains, there was no part of the car that was more developed than the rear brake ducts. Every team developed these hugely because of some freedom in terms of cooling and brake cooling in the wind tunnel and aerodynamic testing restrictions. However, the intricate parts that you got to see at the back end of the Sauber, well, they're absolutely lovely, as you can see on the screen here, but I just love looking at this bit of the car. But it's not just looking at this bit of the car that we do on this show, we also hear about that bit of the car. And who do we hear it from? Well, Inaki Rueda, of course.
So if you look at our rear brake ducts, they have a little flick. Honestly, it's really difficult to see, but if you look at it, it's an area in which there's a lot of development. There's lots of little winglets, and we've just made one last development in that area.
Yeah, you touched on it there. It's been quite a big area of development in this generation of car. Just how big is it, and does it directly generate downforce as well?
So that area of the car is super developed, as you see, because it serves many purposes. It serves the purpose of the exit of the flow from the diffuser, the exit of the flow from the bodywork, and on top of that, it also is very critical to how much tire temperature you gather, and how you actually bleed the temperature from your rear brakes, basically. So tires are a big talking point, and tires generate, around the rim and the tire, we have two heat sources. One is the one of the tire sliding on the surface, of which you cannot really get around. Okay, well, maybe with lift and coast and stuff like that. And then the other heat source is the one from the brakes. We have really hot steaming brakes that are actually radiating the temperature from the inside. So these flicks around that part of the car help not just with the downforce of the floor and the bodywork, as I said, but also to contain the heat coming out of those brakes.
So from the Sauber team, it's a farewell after many seasons of great competition and great racing cars. And for us here on Tech Talk for 2025, it's also a farewell and thanks for being with us all year long. Sorry, what's that? There's some more technical content coming. Interesting. Well, you heard it here first. There's something else coming up. Stay tuned.